necessary. Um, Love to get started because we have what I think is going to be a pretty stimulating conversation in a time that will go by really fast. I'd like to welcome everybody. Good morning. My name is Athan Lindsay. I'm the Director of Community Philanthropy at Your Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro. Um, this morning, I'm so glad to have all of you join us and join myself and Ann Morris and Anthony Foxx for a conversation that we call Transportation Equity, the on-ramp towards building a more equitable community. Before getting started, just want to give folks, for those of you who are not familiar, the Expanded Community Giving is an initiative of the Community Foundation, where the initiative has been in place since 2015 with a clear goal and focus is to expand and engage donors of color to use philanthropy, but to become involved in seeing the Community Foundation as a resource, but also us connecting and growing more donors of color within the Community Foundation. We see this as a value, one of our values that we have. It's always had, but we've been very intentional the last 5 years of focusing on this, and we've had success of increasing our donors of color over the last 5 years to now looking at 23 donors. These are individuals, families, giving circles, and other collective groups. One notably you all may be familiar with and one we're excited about is the Big Equity Fund, the Black Investments in Greater Greensboro. I ask you and encourage you to go to our website to learn more about the Community Foundation, particularly the expanded community giving and some of the work we've been involved in over the last 5 years. It's my pleasure to lead that work with a committee of volunteers and donors. And typically we would have these conversations. If you all have attended them, we've either had them in a luncheon or evening format. But as we all know that right now we're not able to gather. But the demand was so great and interest was still going even during this pandemic. We decided we would get back to our conversations and do it virtually. So this is our first foray into this. So we ask you to bear with us, but it's a continuing process of engaging in the work that we've been doing over the last 5 years. And I'd like to thank the Kellogg Foundation for being our sponsor, the Community Foundation, Greater Greensboro, and our past sponsors have included Quaintance Weaver Hotels and Restaurants, First Bank. We've also had Mount Zion Baptist Church, the Latino Community Coalition of Guilford County, Sam Cone, and many others who have contributed to the expanded community giving anonymously. So got that out the way. Let's get to it. This morning I have with me on my screen, Ann Morris. Ann, if you could just raise your hand so people know who you are. Ann is a local, what I call her a concerned citizen, but she's also a philanthropist, but more importantly, she's a member of our expanded community giving committee. Ann has been very active internationally as a philanthropist, but more recently, she's taken a keen interest in doing things here locally, and you'll hear more about some of the things that motivate her, and her bios is published on our website for the conversation. The next guest, Anthony Foxx, he may be a familiar face to some, definitely a familiar face to me. This is always hard to introduce someone who you know well, but who you've also, I've been fortunate to know and see Anthony as a friend, but also as a public servant who I've known since 1989 when we were freshmen at Davidson College. Anthony and I have agreed that there are statutes of limitations, so we will not be discussing anything that happened on Davidson College campus, Patterson Court, between 1989 and 1993 at certain hours. So with that, Anthony, for those of you who know him, he is a committed public servant, having been former mayor of Charlotte, um, but also most recently having served as our nation's secretary of our Department of Transportation. Welcome, Anthony. We're glad to have you. Welcome home. So glad you committed to do this with us. Anthony is currently, I can't forget this because your employee will make sure to remind you of it, but he's currently the Chief Policy Officer and Senior Advisor to the President and CEO at Lyft. Um, and explained to my son last night, no, you will not be driving us. So you're not a driver. But no further ado, we're going to start this off with Anthony's going to give a few remarks focusing on a central theme of addressing transportation inequity, something that he's been passionate about, committed to, actually even since our days at Davidson talking about things, but as a mayor of Charlotte, and then going and serving under the Obama administration. Anthony's going to kind of set our framework. And many of you might be saying, well, transportation and equity and race, how does it all connect? Well, that's why you're here. We hope you're curious enough. And Anthony's going to set that up for us. Um, but if you can imagine with any systems and infrastructure and historical pieces of our nation and country, we know there have been inequities and they've had an impact. And Anthony takes one of the most unique routes to helping us at least understand equity, and it can be a launching pad to understand other forms of inequity. After Anthony gives his remarks, Ann Morris will share some things as a concerned citizen and philanthropist, and her interest in understanding how race is a factor in why our systems aren't functioning for all of our citizens. She will also give some of her personal insights about how her own philanthropy has shifted to look more to be involved in addressing more systemic issues and to uh, change things through better public policy. For those of you who often don't understand what philanthropy is, what I always say, philanthropy is nothing more than a reaction or being proactive to good or bad public policy. I'll set that as the caveat, especially as we go into the election season. So it's no accident that we have this conversation. So with no further ado, Anthony, I'll get you to kick us off.
Athan, thank you very much, and it's great to always be with you. I will observe the statute of limitations with respect to you and our years together at Davidson, and it's wonderful to join members of the Greensboro, the greater Greensboro community, as you offer an opportunity for us to discuss issues of great concern. Um, I guess the way that I would start the conversation is to maybe give you a little bit of my own perspective, having come through public policy and served at the federal level. I want to maybe anchor my comments around what got me interested in transportation in the first place. And to do that, I have to go back to my years on the Charlotte City Council, when every one Monday out of every month we would have a zoning meeting, and in those zoning meetings were some of the most I can say it now, they were some of the most boring meetings I've ever had to be a part of, because you'd have many of these zoning cases come before you. It was really dry. But sometimes, to kind of break it up, I would actually go out during the week and visit some of the sites that would be discussed the following week. And so I remember specifically going to a greenfield site with a developer who was describing what would happen on this site. They were going to build a multi-use area that would have a movie theater anchoring one side of the development, and a hotel on the other side of development, with a promenade that would connect it. And the way he had visualized this, it started to create a sense in me of really understanding how our built environment has come to be. We think that we're making spontaneous choices to go to one store or another, or go to a movie theater or a hotel. But a lot of times these things have been designed for us to make those choices. And what started to build in my own mind was a sense of curiosity about how our built environment has come to be. And as I started to learn more and research more, I understood even more how some of our own cultural predilections, our own mores, have played a role in how our built environment has developed, not just from a real estate standpoint, but to be clear, from a transportation standpoint. And that took me back to growing up in my neighborhood in Charlotte. Um, Greensboro is connected to I-85 just like Charlotte is. And if you drive through Charlotte, right at the intersection of I-85 and I-77, you are just a stone's throw away from the house that I grew up in. And in that house, when I looked out the front window, I would see a part of I-85. If I walked outside and turned to the right, I would see I-77. And I didn't think about it back then, but in my own little corner of the world, in this tiny neighborhood that was all African American, and a corridor, the Beatty-Ford Road corridor, that was highly African American at the time. Um, what I didn't realize was that there was a reason why blacks had congregated in that area, and there was also a reason why the highway system bifurcated parts of that community. Now, to understand that, we have to go back into the 1950s when President Eisenhower started to move along an idea that had been around for decades of an interconnected highway system. Once the federal government made the commitment to fund 92% of the development of that highway system, and then gave states the responsibility of maintaining it, it became the responsibility of the states to then design where those highways would be built. And you have to remember that back in those days, there was no Voting Rights Act, and very few African Americans, particularly in the South, were able to exercise the right to vote, which meant that state boards of transportation were all white. The elected officials in the state governments were almost all white, if not all white, and even local planning boards were all white. So for African Americans, there was no seat at the table. And as has been said famously, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And that's exactly what happened in many of these communities. So what occurred during the 50s and 60s was a convergence of federal policy, the highway system development on the one hand, and a housing and urban development strategy that was called urban renewal, which was ostensibly to raise blighted parts of communities all across the country, and ended up largely affecting minority and low income areas in the United States. So you can go to almost any city in this country, and I dare say there are parts of Greensboro that could also tell the story, where Black communities, thriving Black communities, had been raised, and in their places, the freeway system was developed. And I have to be clear that I talk a lot about freeways because this is what we experience most days, but I could really be talking about almost any form of transportation. In our own college town of Davidson, Athan, those railroad tracks stood as a barrier between communities back in those times. And if we look at air traffic noise, there's a disproportionate amount of air traffic noise that goes over low income and poor communities. And so it almost every form of transportation has been weaponized against communities of color in low-income parts of our system. Now, I mention this all to say one thing, which is that although I'm talking about transportation, it's just a manifestation of what's underneath our culture and what has been underneath our culture. And I think what's important about our conversation today is that maybe we can unearth some of this a little bit at a deeper level, and perhaps figure out some ways in which the greater Greensboro area can be a leader in reversing some of what's occurred, and perhaps creating a new platform for our country to come together in a much different and a much more important way.
Mhm. Thank you for helping us frame that. Um, Anthony, with transportation, literally growing up, we always hear the word across the tracks. When we were at Davidson, I'd often be across the tracks having Sunday dinners, depending on where I was. But as I got older, I realized that that has become intentional and part of policy. Um, so with that, Ann Morris, she's no transportation expert. She wanted us to let that be known. But what she is a committed, concerned citizen who's grown interested in deepening her philanthropy around inequity and justice. And Anne, are you ready to give your response? And
Sure, I am. Thank you, Athan, and thank you so much, Anthony, for being with us today. It's fascinating to hear you talk about your stories growing up and how truly transportation is just another example of how racism is embedded in so many of our systems. So I know I'll learn a lot from you today, and look forward to a lively, rich conversation. Thanks to all of you all for joining today, putting up with yet another Zoom. So I looked at the list of the participants who had signed up for today, and I'm extremely humbled and aware that many of you have been engaged in racial equity work, community work, philanthropy, much longer than I have. I'm really relatively new on this journey, and I've spent most of my career as a journalist. So what I think I'd like to do today is just pose some questions and offer a few thoughts, and hopefully at the end we'll have a little time for questions and answers and to kind of dig into these issues a little bit. So for me, really the fundamental question has become, what does it mean to be an effective white ally for racial equity? What does that mean in terms of personal anti-racism work that we need to do? What does that mean in terms of how we spend our time and our energy in the community? And personally, what does that mean for my philanthropy? So at the Community Foundation, I've been a fund holder probably for about 15 years. I've been involved with the foundation in a variety of different ways through the years, served on the grant making committee for many years. And more recently, as Athan said, the expanded community giving committee. And that's what really brings me here today. I'm extremely excited about the foundation's growing emphasis on community philanthropy and embracing more of an intentional role in advocating for public policy. I believe really passionately in putting resources in the hands of those who are proximate to the problem and trusting those people to lead the way. So I've supported initiatives like Giving Circles, the Greensboro Mutual Aid Fund, and as Athan mentioned, the Greensboro Big Equity Fund, the Black Investment in Greensboro Fund, which is recently launched. It's an endowment created and led by Black donors. Shout out to Mae Douglas, who I see is here with us today. This endowment will fund Black entrepreneurship in Greensboro. It will address health disparities and also the digital divide, which are all structural racism at work in our community. I think it's interesting that there's $63 million in donor advised funds at the Community Foundation in Greensboro. And every year donors give away, donors like me, maybe many of you, we give away a total of $13 to $15 million. And about half of that goes to faith organizations, churches, synagogues, the like. and to education, the majority of which goes to universities. I know a lot of us like to give to our alma maters. And I'm not knocking either of those. I give to my church, my university. But I think that if we could redirect and rethink some of those funds, wouldn't it be amazing the impact it could have on our community if some of those funds went, for example, to the Big Equity Fund in terms of being able to address some of these structural racism problems. One of my personal heroes is Darren Walker, who is the president of the Ford Foundation. And he's a visionary in terms of taking philanthropy in new directions. And he says that philanthropy, which if I think we're honest with ourselves, has traditionally been a force for maintaining the status quo, that philanthropy needs to move from generosity to justice. And that speaks to me. And for me also personally, how can I move from supporting charity to supporting change? My friend Frank Dew, many of you probably know Pastor Frank Dew. He loves to tell this story, and I always remember it. That it's kind of a parable. A couple come upon a river, and they're standing by the river, and they happen to see a baby floating down the river. So what do? They do what you or I would do. They jump in the water, they rescue the baby, they take the baby to the shore. And wow, that was crazy. Where did that baby come from? Then there's another baby coming down the river, and another, and they're so busy rescuing the babies. And they keep doing that for a long time. And then they finally look at each other and they go, hey, I wonder who's throwing all the babies in the water. So that's really the question, is who's throwing all the babies in the water? That's why we need to look upstream. And if I can add to that parable, why are these babies so disproportionately babies of color? So I'll stop there and turn it back to you, Athan.
Great. So, Ann, you did a great job of some things that, especially lifting up community philanthropy, which sometimes even I forget it, which is part of my title. But with that, community philanthropy is really, we're trying to engage more donors who want to go deep, but also expand this narrative of philanthropy for those who are most impacted or affected by it. But really, Ann also mentioned about allies coming together as a community. But also one of the things, as we bring folks together from their perspectives and their lenses, which they experience life, we inevitably will come to our who we are as a country, where race has been a factor. So Anthony, I want to kind of pivot to you, and since you are still active in transportation, one of the things you did that really blew my mind, but then I said, wow, he really did listen to me on one of those nights we were having the deep conversations. But when you were at the DOT, you started actually talking about looking at the policies and what you all were going to be doing, but encouraging folks to have a racial equity lens to determine investments. You were doing it, and you were smooth and subtle with it, but I went back and read some of the stuff, but I was like, okay, I want to take credit. You maybe looked over my paper, but one of the days, no, well, let me quit. But talk to us a little bit about what were you thinking, but also as we're talking to donors, why is that important? You were saying, okay, it's okay, take stock, but we have to look at things from this lens of with equity, but look at race and what it's played into it. Let's get you unmuted.
Sorry about that. Okay. Thank you, Athan, for the question. I think what is obvious to me, and I think it's become more obvious to more and more Americans of all different walks of life, is that we're hurting. And we've been hurting for a long time. And racism is an expensive operation in this country. It costs us money in terms of people paying more to live away from each other. It costs us more in terms of in every way, because we can't be the country we want to be until we get over this. And And I think that the conversation that I tried to start nationally in transportation was a variation of a conversation that I think we all need to start. What's interesting is that at that time, it took quite a bit to get the permission to talk about this issue, because the types of situations that we've seen in the last few months with George Floyd and Armand Aubrey and Breonna Taylor, and this recognition that we're in the middle of right now was not there in 2013, 2014, 2015. And so there was a lot of like, well, why are you talking about this? What does this have to do with the price of tea someplace in America? Um, but I think from my own vantage point, it's that I see the broken pieces of our country every day, and I love this place. I'm a fifth generation North Carolinian, and this country I feel is every bit a part of who I am. But as James Baldwin said, we have to critique that which we love in order for it to become better. And so that's what I was thinking about. Now, in practice, what I will tell you is that I don't think we as a country, or we as an American people, um, I don't think we're programmed to fix this. I think we're programmed to continue it. And because of that, we have to constantly be skeptical of our own intuitions, and to hold them up to light, and to be in constant conversation with people who come from different perspectives, so that we can get the best of everyone's ideas. And I think that's one of the more troubling things about where we are as a country, but maybe we'll get to that later.
Mhm. Wow. The one nugget you dropped on me, and I saw you nodding, so I'm gonna lead to you. This question about we're programmed to continue it, but when I conversations and I look at you and hear your journey and that piece about program to continue it, but there was something that's happened in your experience that's interrupted that. Could you mind sharing with us your thoughts about being programmed, or maybe you don't agree? Um, but you know, there was something took place with you about this programming, if that makes sense.
Sure. Well, I'm very early on my journey. I just like to emphasize that. I'm a white woman, an older white woman with lots of privilege, and I've in terms of both my race, the access to the education I've had in my life, opportunities, and inherited generational wealth. I'm from Virginia. I'm from Roanoke, Virginia, and I have ancestors I know about who were slaveholders. I know that. And in fact, one of the stories I was told growing up by some older relatives was that our family, who owned the slaves, well, we were one of the good families, because after emancipation, the slaves returned to our plantation, which was somehow some sort of proof that we were ones of the good ones. So that was a myth that I was raised on, a white supremacist myth. I didn't know that at the time, but it's very clear to me now. But I'll also say that this idea of being sort of, one of the good white people, I'm a good liberal person, has something I've held on to in my life. And it's been really only fairly recently that I've started to, through some deep anti-racism work that I've done, that I've started to see that I have my own myths, and I haven't done nearly enough. So I'm trying to play some catch up. I think if you know better, you can do better. Darren Walker, who I do love, has this wonderful quote, and he says, "So it's really beyond the capacity of philanthropy to fix our economic and political systems, but as beneficiaries of the biases and the flaws of these systems, I believe that holders of wealth and influence today, whether individuals, corporations, or foundations, share an urgent obligation to try." So that's kind of where I am now, as I'm trying.
Mhm. It's great. And Ann, you said something lifting up beyond philanthropy, and this is a plug for the expanded community giving community conversations. They're designed to do just this, to have courageous conversations that bring us in community with one another, but also to kind of help us become strategic in our philanthropy, because philanthropy will be looked at to carry a lot of things. But in my span of my career, you both have touched on it, is that the philanthropy is just a tool, but ultimately, if we don't have uh, an analysis or a heart for it, or even look at how, as I like to say, why we behave the way we behave, uh, we continue to perpetuate uh, how we've been programmed. So that's what these conversations about, um, to also get us uncomfortable, but to lean us towards something that's hopeful and that's effective and that works. So with that, um, I give you an opportunity to talk about uh, either what keeps you hopeful and what's working uh, that you see either with your own philanthropy or others, or Anthony and the policies or things that you're doing at Lyft. Uh, what's working?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that there's a lot of dimensions to how I would answer that question. Um, I think one dimension of that would be that we're having conversations today in light of sorry, my kids, everybody's blended everything, so
We know.
printer happens to be sitting here, so my kids are doing homework. um, it has to do with the actions that I think more and more folks are trying to take. I mean, in the wake of George Floyd, in the wake of some of these incidents we've seen just in this last year, um, there seems to be a resurgence of interest in this country in repairing. And I'm excited to see the rush to put lots of money into philanthropy, to try to help address some of these issues. But let's be very clear that what's underneath it is still a huge wealth gap, and a huge uh, what I think is a bit of an empathy gap that exists in this country, and that's going to be tough to overcome. I'd say that what gets me most excited is when I hear people really getting tactical about how they're going to address these issues, because at the end of the day, it's what we do that's going to make the difference. It's not even what we say, or even where we put our dollars. It's what those dollars do to change outcomes. And I think what Ann has shared with us, I think is so valuable, because it's if we can peel away the stories we tell ourselves and see where we are as a country, where we are as a people, um, in a more unvarnished way, I think that begins to help us. It begins to help us figure out how to move forward. And I think that's really remarkable, what you've uncovered about your own family and history.
Well, let me jump in here and talk a little bit about, what I think is working. And one of the things that is very encouraging to me, I have two daughters who are 21 and 23, and they really are my best teachers right now on some of these issues. They have a really different worldview than what I grew up with. They have embraced the Black Lives Matter movement. They were out out on the streets, and the protests were so many young people, and I was so proud of them. And so I am hopeful about this 20-something generation, that they really get this in a way that folks my age, we're a little slower to get it. The other thing I've just seen is this tremendous political activism by that generation. I've been involved for the past 4 years pretty intensely in some political campaigns, trying to make a difference in our state legislature. And the number of young people who are volunteering and phone banking every day and just really getting involved, to me, that's extremely encouraging. The other thing I'll mention in terms of philanthropy that is exciting to me is there's a new group of progressive-minded white donors that's come together at the Community Foundation. It's called Equity Allies. We just started in 2020, so it's a fairly new group, but our hope is to both learn from each other in terms of how we're using our resources, and then to eventually join together as a collective to both co-fund some equity work in Greensboro and also to use our voices. I think as a white person of privilege, I have just through who I know, through my network, through my social capital, I have access to some policymakers that some folks maybe don't have. And it is an obligation to use that influence and that social capital to try to make a difference in terms of public policy that pushes us more toward equity.
And Ann, if I can put these words back on that encapsulate what you just said. One day we were sitting in the room and we were talking about this, and you said, this is about using our power, and it's about power. And that stuck with me for the last couple of months. And that's kind of how we got here. Thank you, Anthony and Ann, for that. I'm going to start taking in a few questions here. And here's how I'm going to do this. I have one question I want to acknowledge from a good friend, Mercy. She's all the way here participating from England, Great Britain. So Mercy, we can wave your hand. Thank you for joining. And Mercy has asked a really good question, and this is probably towards you. What are the practical steps to move from generosity to justice? And also, yeah, so kind of, I guess, your steps to this, but some practical steps about, going from the even charity. I think there's another one about how do we go from charity? Did that make sense? And Mercy, did I capture that question? Yep. So, Ann, yeah, some of the practical steps of moving from charity, but generosity to justice.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great question. And I can't say I, have perfect answer for that, but some thoughts are, if you think about, for example, the way we feed the hungry in this country. And in Greensboro, we have a Greensboro is a generous community. We have some wonderful organizations here that I have supported. Out of the Garden, Backpack Beginnings, Simple Gesture, these programs that feed the hungry. And we all do this, right? We'll take cans of food, we'll put them on our front doorstep, we'll contribute because there's such a need. And God bless these organizations and what the work that they do, particularly this year, right? But if you step back and think about it a minute, what a crazy way to feed our nation, right? I go to the store, I buy cans of food, I put them on my front porch, somebody comes and picks them up and they distribute them. It's just kind of, if you stop and think about it a minute, it's just a really inefficient, crazy way. So do we, it's not an either or, we need to support charities, but can we focus a little bit more then on why is there this hunger and where can we use our voice through advocacy, through changing who's in office to change the policies. North Carolina, for example, has, one of the worst unemployment benefit insurance systems in the country. So who's deciding that? Why do we have that? If we had a better unemployment benefit coverage, that there would be less hunger. So it's, I think, just trying to move upstream, who's making those decisions and how can we either fund or use our voices to support that kind of policy change.
Mm-hmm. And when you say fund, and just to be specific for people who may not understand, are there types of nonprofits that, when you say fund, that you could share with us? Like I know of a North Carolina Justice Center or some that you may know of that.
Yeah, a few examples of that I've been privileged to support are the Equal Justice Initiative, which is working in the criminal justice reform area. This is Brian Stevenson's group, and they're doing great work in that criminal justice sphere. I support the Poor People's Campaign. Reverend Barber, I think, has trying to raise the issues around structural racism and poverty in a really powerful way. So those are a couple of examples.
Mhm. And that's good, because also a lot of times it's people are new to philanthropy. They feel like that, oh, I can't do, my advisor told me I can't do anything with public policy, but you can support groups, nonprofits that are active and engaging in public policy. And that's perfectly legal and within the parameters of supporting. It's just a personal thing that I've always tried to educate donors about that, you don't do the policy, but you can support groups that do that.
And one more great suggestion is Bread for the World is a wonderful advocacy, public policy, education organization that works on solutions to hunger.
Okay. Anthony, here are a couple of questions coming in your area.
Can I maybe jump in on the last one a little bit?
Sure.
I also think, one of the great things about philanthropy is that you can do things that are unique and potentially scalable.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times we want to believe government is really smart and knows how to solve problems, but I can tell you, I haven't been part of a government that's nearly as smart as most American people are, and so when you get involved in philanthropy, one of the things you can do is to pilot things that government can't or won't pilot, and teach the public sector what works in a way that maybe wouldn't have happened otherwise. And I use Project Lift in Charlotte as an example. My high school was great when I went through it, but it became more segregated and more poor and more challenged over time. And the community came together to try to put $50 million into improving not just that school, but its feeder schools. And that has resulted in great improvement in the school, but also the public sector has now picked up some of the things that the project was doing. So I do think there are ways that philanthropy can be really important. And the other area where I think there is need is there's a lot of concern about statues that need to be torn down, but very little concern or conversation about which statues need to be put up. We just had Vance High School in Charlotte renamed for Julius Chambers, and I really think there should be a concerted movement, particularly in a state like North Carolina, where there is such a brilliant history of African American leadership, that an effort to dig into our history and to start an effort to see more things named after people who really deserve that recognition.
Mhm. So you both given great examples about philanthropy and really going upstream, what that is, being creative. Philanthropy, often David Dotson, formerly of MDC, has said that philanthropy is often the research and development to do things. And a great story I always tell people is North Carolina, we had a great history of two governors, Terry Sanford and Jim Hunt, were masterful in working with public-private partnerships with philanthropy. Little known fact that people don't realize that kindergarten came into being because philanthropy supported it and took the chances. And that's an example of philanthropy and how you can be creative. Anthony, here's a question I want to get to real quickly. We've had several people have asked about addressing the effects of gentrification, transportation on communities of color, but also some personal experiences using public transportation. How do low-income families survive in situations without public transportation? So basically putting you back in your role as the chief
Yeah.
policy person for transportation.
Yeah. So a couple of things. I think one gaping opportunity for philanthropy is the expansion and development of community land trusts. If you think about it, when gentrification happens, what starts to occur is that the dirt in the ground becomes more expensive, because the area is more attractive for some reason or what have you. We're experiencing this across the country with some of the interior transportation projects that are happening in Crenshaw, Los Angeles, for example, where there's a light rail line going in there. Same problem. So if you can lock in the price of the dirt, if you can acquire enough of it under the aegis of a nonprofit, and then put housing on that land, and then allow it to be accessed by people for the cost of the housing, not necessarily the cost of the dirt, you begin to create a sustainable way to keep the income diversity in areas that have historically had that. So I think that's one very clear strategy that can be utilized. As far as transportation is concerned, I think there's a growing concern and reasonably placed concern that poor people are being priced out of the interior of our cities, which is where the transit assets are. And so when they move to the suburbs or the exurbs, their cost of housing goes down, but their cost of transportation goes up. And so, selfishly as Lyft, we've been able to allow people to access transportation in places that don't have transit or taxi cabs. But from a land use and planning standpoint, it is absolutely a better deal for all concerned to ensure that lower income people can continue to live closer to where transit assets are.
Okay. And Anthony, just a quick follow up. You talked about Lyft. We had a question from a participant, wanted to know more about some of the policy work that you're doing at Lyft. Let me call it here. I want to hear more about what's happening at Lyft as it relates to work on policy.
Yeah, well, as you might imagine, it's a challenging time for anybody that's got a business in travel or tourism. But that said, I'm very proud of what Lyft has been doing to connect communities. We have three programs in particular that I think are examples of corporate philanthropy. We have a jobs access program, which is helping people who are looking for work get transportation to interviews and things like that, and in some cases, their own employment. We have a grocery store access program, which is helping people who live in food deserts across the country. I grew up in a food desert. I know what that's like, and we're helping people get connected to fresh and healthy food. And then we're also doing a voting access program this year, which is connecting people to the polls. So, those are things that we do because we believe in our civic obligation.
Great, great. So we're getting to the close. We've had some great questions. This has gone way great. I'm not going to jinx it. Want to put two things before you and Ann. We'll start with Ann. If I was to give you the magic wand and to create whatever you wanted to create that help address this equity, be it transportation or whatever, how would you use your magic wand, and in what manner, in what way?
Wow. No, from my perspective anyway, I feel like it's just really critical that white folks kind of dig deep into their own either family history, how they were raised, what their unconscious biases are, do some deep anti-racism work. Again, I'm still very much early in my journey on that, but what I've learned has changed the way I view the world. And so I just, you know, it's great to do it at a group. It's great to have a community to do the work with. We have a lot of great resources in Greensboro. The Racial Equity Institute, for example, is doing great training. So there are lots of opportunities to do this work. And I just encourage everyone who has, and I'm sure, you know, many people on this call have, because you care about equity is why you're here today. But I think it's powerful, and it's a first step.
Great. Anthony, I'm not going to give you the magic wand.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you that magic basketball that, well, that's going with statute of limitations. Sorry.
Okay.
We'll come back to the magic. How about the magic lift car that will take us to equity? And what would you do with this?
Yeah. I think I would take, you know, the whole state. I take the whole country and I put us all at a table, and I would put up our list of problems, and I would say, we can do this the hard way, or we could do this the easy way. The hard way is expensive, and it's potentially fraught with all kinds of ways in which we can get it wrong. But the right way is for us to be at this table and to problem solve. So let's work through each of these. I'm hopeful because I've had an opportunity to know people who've been through many more struggles than I have. I had an opportunity to spend a lot of time with the late great John Lewis, and he would always tell me, you know, be hopeful. Things have been tough before, and they will be tough again, but maintain your hope. And I remember talking to Franklin McCain, who made history in Greensboro as one of the Greensboro Four, and who talked to me about what that experience was like. And he said, you know, for all of the 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 turmoil and the shouting and the spitting and uh, the brutality, that it was the first time he felt like a man. That um, he had really experienced freedom in a way that he hadn't before. And you know, I think for people in this country of any hue, it's important to understand, and it's important for us to figure out how people in this country, regardless of who they are, where they come from, can feel free. And I think until all of us are free, none of us are. And that's when I talk about where the pain is in this country. It's an unseen, under discussed pain that all of us are dealing with. And the more we can peel back the onion and understand where that comes from and what it's about, the better off we'll be. So, you know, I think in that table, at that conversation, there wouldn't be this, you know, you don't love America because you're talking badly about it. No, it's about making America the best place it can be. And I think all of us, if we can get to the point where that is our goal, will be a much better country.
Thank you. Thank you. Also, I see when you said Frank McCain, I see we have Frank McCain. I see you, Frank, there. So glad you can join us. But you both spoke to something that a mentor helped me come to realization on my own. And when I was trying to explain what I did, I said, we're really working philanthropy. And somebody was saying, well, you just help give away money. I said, no, hope is the commodity in which we deal with our philanthropy. Because if we don't have any hope, that's our commodity to bring to bear on these communities. Well, we're coming to the end. I see there have been some resources, questions about REI. I think we got them up, and there's some other resources. Thank you, Sam. before we close out, Anthony and Ann, if there are any resources that you would like to share with folks, you can share them now, or you can forward them to me, and we'll get them available. And before I go, I'd like to acknowledge and thank Tracy Poole for bringing all this together. Tracy, thank you for making this happen. Thank all of you all for being able to participate. Usually at this point, I identify committee members, but you're all over the place. You know who you are. Thank you for joining us. And Anthony, any closing thoughts before we head out, or resources?
Well, I just mentioned that the Community Foundation staff is a great resource and has been useful to me in helping to figure out my philanthropy. Shout out to Tara Sandercock, who I believe is on here today. Tara is a rich resource who knows so much about community needs and nonprofits. Shout out to Athan, who's also been helpful to me. So I think if you're interested as a donor and learning more about how you can make a difference, there are folks who can help you chart that path at the foundation.
So again, Ann and Anthony, thank you. I'll just give the virtual clap here. And before we go, we'd like for you all just to continue to stay posted and joining us in this virtual format. We're all figuring it out just like you all are. Anthony, I came into the office to do it because I have a second grader who you can only imagine, he has no Zoom protocols except it's all about him when he needs something. But we want to encourage you all to continue to stay safe and also go out and vote if you haven't. Please do that. But also we it's this time when we say the next event, we don't know, we're like everybody else, but we look forward to being able to gather together safely. So with that, Anthony, I'll extend the invitation for you to come back and do this in person, and maybe we can do it again at some point, or you join us for a conversation. But at this point, looking at the time, we got this done within the time frame. So am I missing anything, CFGG staff? Did we get it? Stay posted for everything. Definitely stay posted for the big equity fund news coming with that. You can go to our website. Anything that's been posted up here, you can contact me directly or any of our staff members. What I like to say, this is your community foundation, and I really say your, and we're really working hard to make the community foundation be reflective of Greensboro's rich diversity and Greensboro's rich history of being a trailblazing community that's progressive and is forward thinking. So we're trying to create that space, and we thank you all for doing that. So with that, I think we're all free to go. I think I covered everything. This format is a lot easier than when trying to rush through my lunch. So, but again, thank you all. Have a great day, remain safe, and stay tuned for our next virtual events.
Thank you.
All right. Anthony, I know you got to jump off and go. We can follow up later, or Ann, if you guys